So who was Adi Shankaracharya? I mean, was he a divine sage born over 2,500 years ago? Or an 8th century scholar? Or maybe, just maybe, a cultural icon whose legend was built up centuries after he died? You know, he's one of the most important figures, period, in Indian philosophy. But his life, well, it's a fascinating puzzle, totally wrapped up in legend and historical debate. All right, let's dive in and try to unpack this.
And right out of the gate, we're hit with two completely different stories. It's wild. On one hand, you've got the legend, this divine figure born way back in 509 BCE who pretty much single-handedly revitalized Hinduism. But then, on the other hand, you have the historical consensus, a brilliant scholar from the 8th century CE whose massive reputation, well, it was actually built up long, long after he lived. So the big question is, how on earth do we make sense of this?
Okay, so to get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into 5 parts. First, we'll tackle that huge dating debate. Then we'll dive into the incredible legends of his life. After that, it's all about his revolutionary philosophy. Then we'll dig into the historical puzzle of it all, and finally, we'll look at his lasting legacy.
All right, part 1. Let's start with this huge question of when he actually lived. Because honestly, if you don't get the timeline, it's really hard to get the man.
So you might be asking, where does this super early date even come from? Well, it's all rooted in tradition. See, major monastery institutions, these are called mathas, they trace their lineage directly back to Shankara. Places like the Kanchi Kamakoti Pitham, for example. And their internal records place his birth way, way back in 509 BCE. Now think about that for a second. If that's true, it would make him a contemporary of the Buddha. That's a huge deal.
But, and this is a big but, modern historians almost universally disagree. They say, hold on a second, and here's why. It really boils down to 2 main things: a total lack of evidence and some pretty deep linguistic analysis. I mean, there's just no archaeological proof, no texts from that early period that even mention him. Zip, nada. Plus, when scholars look at the actual language in his writings and who he was debating, all signs point to him living in the 8th century CE. It's a massive discrepancy, and it really sets the stage for everything else we're about to get into.
Okay, so with that huge dating debate swirling in our minds, let's switch gears and step into the world of the legend. And believe me, this story is packed with miracles and a literally superhuman intellect.
So according to the legends, Shankara wasn't just a smart kid. He was a full-blown phenomenon. They say he was born in Kaladi, a village in Kerala, and by the age of 2, he could speak and write Sanskrit fluently. And then, by age 4, he could recite the Vedas. We're talking about incredibly vast, complex scriptures that people spend their entire lives trying to master. It's an almost unbelievable start to a life, right?
And the story of how he found his calling, it's pure drama. It's probably the most famous tale from his childhood. So picture this. He's just 8 years old, bathing in a river when a crocodile grabs his leg. He calmly tells his terrified mother that the croc will only let him go if she agrees to his one wish, to let him become a sannyasi, a wandering monk. I mean, what a choice, right? Faced with losing her son to the river or to a monastic life, she tearfully agrees. The crocodile lets go, and just like that, his destiny is sealed.
After that, his life just moves at lightning speed. It's incredible. At 8, he leaves home to find his guru. By 12, he's completely mastered the scriptures. By 16, he's already written his most important, most profound works. And then, by the age of just 32, his mission is complete. He attains samadhi and leaves his physical body. It's such a short life, but what he packed into it is just astonishing.
Okay, but Shankara was so much more than just a prodigy. You have to think of him as an architect. He looked at this vast, kind of scattered landscape of ideas and built this incredibly powerful, unified philosophical structure that would literally go on to reshape Hinduism.
So what was this philosophy? It's called Advaita Vedanta. And the key word here is Advaita, which literally means non-dual or not two. At its very core is this absolutely radical idea that your individual self, your consciousness, what's called the Atman, isn't just a part of the ultimate reality or Brahman. No, it is Brahman. There is zero separation. This entire massive philosophy is captured perfectly in one single famous verse. Brahman is the only reality, the world is an illusion, and the individual self is nothing but Brahman. Now, when Shankara said the world is Maya or illusion, he didn't mean it wasn't there.
He meant that our perception of it as a bunch of separate things is the illusion. In truth, everything we see is just a manifestation of that one single reality, Brahman.
And here's the thing, he didn't just write about this stuff. He was a builder. He created an entire framework to support these ideas. He wrote the go-to commentaries on the most important texts in Hinduism. He established 4 huge monasteries, one in each corner of India, as centers for learning. He even introduced a new form of worship, the Panchayatana Puja, which was genius because it united different sects by honoring 5 major deities as just different forms of the one Brahman. And he organized the entire monastic order. He was absolutely a thinker and a doer.
Okay, so now let's pivot back to that historical perspective. Because for all the power of this legendary figure, modern scholars paint a very different and much more complex picture.
I mean, just look at the dates side by side. The disagreement is just stark. You have the monastic traditions like Dwaraka and Kanchi, putting him in the 5th or 6th century BCE, and then you have modern scholarship which plants him firmly in the 8th century CE. That's a gap of more than 1,200 years. This isn't some minor academic squabble, it's a giant historical chasm. And this is where the scholarly argument gets really provocative. The evidence suggests that Shankara wasn't actually this huge, influential figure during his own lifetime. In fact, for centuries after he died, there's almost no mention of him in other Hindu, Buddhist, or Jain texts. His fame, it seems, exploded much, much later. We're talking the 14th century, when the powerful Vijayanagara Empire championed his philosophy. That's when his story was really elevated, turning the 8th century scholar into the deified, nation-unifying hero of the legends.
And that historical context leads to one of the most famous controversies about him. His rivals, especially from other Hindu schools of thought, threw a pretty serious accusation his way. They called him a crypto-Buddhist, basically a Buddhist in disguise. So why on earth would they say that?
Well, his critics heard his ideas about the world being an illusion, and they thought, hey, that sounds a lot like the Buddhist concept of emptiness, or shunyata. But, and this is the whole ballgame right here, there is a fundamental, non-negotiable difference. Shankara's Advaita is built on the existence of Atman, an eternal, unchanging ultimate self. Buddhism, on the other hand, is defined by the doctrine of anatta, or no self. It's not a small detail, it is the absolute core distinction between the two. But the fact that he was even accused of this shows you just how radical his ideas felt to people at the time.
So, where does that leave us? How do we possibly reconcile the historical man with this towering legend? Well, in our final section, let's try to do just that, by looking at his ultimate, undeniable impact.
You know, maybe the most important thing to grasp is this. It almost doesn't matter if his fame happened in his lifetime or was constructed centuries later. The idea of Shankara, that became an incredibly powerful symbol. The image of this brilliant young sage traveling the land and unifying India with the sheer force of his intellect became the very emblem of Hindu philosophical revival.
So let's boil this all down. 5 key takeaways. Number 1, the systematizer. He took scattered ideas and forged them into the powerhouse philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. Number 2, the unifier. He created real, lasting institutions and traditions that brought different groups together. Number 3, the historical enigma. There's just no getting around that huge gap between the historical man and the legend. 4, a lasting influence. His writings are still central to Hindu thought, period. And finally, number 5, a cultural icon. He became the symbol of Hindu philosophy and revival.
And that leaves us with one last big question to think about. Where does Shankara's real power come from? Is it from the historical deeds of that 8th century scholar? Or is it from the incredible, enduring legend that grew around him for 1,000 years? A legend that inspired millions and helped shape the course of an entire religion. It's a question that really gets you thinking about where history ends and myth begins.